I don't care if your mother died yesterday. This presentation needs to be perfect. The words hit me as I stood in his office, still dressed in the black dress I'd worn to the funeral that morning. The fabric felt too tight now, like it might suffocate me. Rain tapped against the glass wall behind Dominic, my CEO, as he continued without looking up from his computer. Put your emotions behind you and focus on the project. The investors are coming in 3 weeks, and we can't afford any mistakes. Their capital injection will push us international. 5 years of work comes down to this moment. I blinked, struggling to process his words through the fog of grief that had enveloped me since Mom took her last breath. Dominic, I just buried. Everyone loses people, Iris. He finally looked up, his gaze sharp as a scalpel. My grandfather died during our first major launch. Did I take time off? No. I worked harder. That's how I built this company from nothing. His words scraped against my raw emotions. 5 years I'd devoted to building his boutique fragrance company from a workshop in a converted garage to a brand on the cusp of international recognition. 5 years perfecting the scent architecture system my mother had taught me. The very system that transformed his mediocre products into experiences that made people close their eyes and breathe deeper. The funeral was today, I whispered, my voice barely audible. And tomorrow is another workday. Professional obligations don't pause for personal circumstances. Dominic stood, straightening his tie. You're my head of product development. Act like it. My fingers closed around the small glass vial in my pocket, the last scent my mother had created before cancer claimed her. She'd pressed it into my palm 2 days before she died, whispering that it contained everything she'd learned about creating emotional connections through scent. You're right, I said, something shifting inside me like tectonic plates before an earthquake. I'll focus solely on the work. That night, after everyone left, I stayed. The office fell silent except for the hum of the air conditioning and the soft tap of my keyboard. One by one, I accessed our scent architecture database, the heart of our company's success. With methodical precision, I began altering the formulations for our upcoming collection. I removed the emotional architecture components that made our scents distinctive, the precise balance of notes that triggered specific emotional responses. I left the fragrances technically correct, but stripped them of their soul. Without the emotional framework I'd built, they became ordinary scents, pleasant but forgettable. Nothing like the transformative experiences we were known for creating. When I finished, I drafted my resignation letter, printed it, and placed it on Dominic's desk. The next morning, his voice echoed through the office before I'd even taken my coat off. Iris, my office, now. I walked in, my back straight, face composed. The resignation letter was clutched in his hand. You can't leave now, he said, eyes wide with panic. The investor presentation? I'm putting my emotions aside to focus on what matters, I replied, using his exact words. My notice is effective immediately. Is this because of what I said yesterday? Look, I was stressed, and no explanations needed. I understand perfectly. Goodbye, Dominic. I turned and walked out, ignoring the stunned faces of my colleagues as I collected my personal items and left the building for the last time. Or so I thought. What I didn't expect was how quickly everything would unravel, or that Dominic would soon be at my door, desperately pleading for my return. But I'm getting ahead of myself. If you're enjoying this story of workplace betrayal and calculated revenge, hit that like button and subscribe to hear more stories that explore the complex emotions we navigate in professional settings. Drop a comment about a time someone told you to set your emotions aside at work. I read every single one. Now, let me properly introduce myself. My name is Iris Laurent. At 32, I'd become the driving creative force behind Sensorial, the company Dominic founded, but that I had transformed. I'd always been different, even as a child. While other kids played with toys, I collected scents. Mom called me her little bloodhound because I could identify what she was cooking from 3 rooms away just from the aroma. My mother, Elena, was a master perfumer who never achieved recognition in the mainstream fragrance industry. Her approach was too unconventional, too intimate. While traditional perfumers focused on pleasing scent combinations, Mom understood that fragrance was about emotional architecture, in building scents that triggered specific emotional responses. A true perfume doesn't just smell good, she always said. It creates a bridge between memory and emotion. When I was 27, fresh from getting my chemistry degree, and working at a laboratory that tested commercial fragrances, Mom encouraged me to meet with Dominic. He had started a small fragrance company with ambitious goals but mediocre products. She thought my scientific background combined with her emotional architecture theory could transform his business. She was right. Within a year of joining, I had developed our signature methodology, a precise system for creating scents that evoked specific emotional experiences. Our first collection using this approach sold out in weeks. Within 3 years, we had expanded from one small workspace to an office, with 20 employees and distribution in luxury boutiques across the country. Dominic loved to tell the story of our success, positioning himself as the visionary who revolutionized fragrance development. He never mentioned that the revolutionary approach came from what my mother had taught me, refined through my chemistry knowledge. In interviews, he spoke of our unique process, while I stood silently beside him, the unnamed architect of that very process. I accepted this arrangement because I loved the work itself, creating scents that moved people, that transported them, that made them close their eyes and smile. That was worth more than recognition. Mom always told me that true artistry didn't need applause to validate it. Then Mom got sick. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer. 6 months, the doctors said. She lasted 4. During those 4 months, I split my time between her bedside and the lab, creating our most ambitious collection yet for the investor presentation. Dominic grudgingly allowed me to work flexible hours, though his disapproval was obvious in the tight smiles and curt emails asking for updates. 2 days before she died, Mom gave me the vial, her final creation. "This is everything I know," she whispered, her once strong hands now thin and trembling. "About scent, about emotion, about life. It's all in there, Iris." I opened it later that night, alone in my apartment. The scent was unlike anything I'd experienced, complex layers that shifted and evolved, revealing new dimensions with each breath. It made me cry, then laugh, then feel a profound sense of peace. It was her masterpiece. The morning after the funeral, I brought the vial to work, planning to analyze its composition. That's when Dominic called me into his office and told me to put my emotions aside. The first week after I resigned passed quietly. I spent days in my apartment, alternating between grief for my mother and a strange, hollow feeling about leaving the work that had defined me for years. I avoided calls from my former colleagues. I changed my email password and notification settings. I needed space. On day 8, my phone rang with Dominic's number. I let it go to voicemail. "Iris, we need to talk. There's an issue with the new collection. The test group feedback is concerning. Call me back." I didn't. 3 more calls came that day, then 5 the next. I blocked his number. Then came the emails. "The development team can't figure out what's wrong. Everything checks out technically, but something's missing." Then, "Our biggest retail partner says the samples feel generic. What did you change before you left?" And finally, "Please, Iris, whatever you did, we need to fix it. The investor presentation is in 10 days. I deleted them all. On day 14, my former assistant Riley appeared at my door. I almost didn't recognize her. Her typically perfect appearance was disheveled, dark circles under her eyes. "Everyone's panicking," she said when I invited her in. "The new collection is failing all the feedback sessions. 3 potential retail partners expressed disappointment after sampling. The team has checked everything: ingredient quality, measurements, maturation processes, but they can't find what's wrong." I poured her tea, saying nothing. "Dominic is losing it," she continued. "He's shouting at everyone. Yesterday he threw a bottle against the wall when our biggest distributor suggested postponing the launch. I stirred honey into my tea. Sounds stressful." Riley leaned forward. "What did you do, Iris?" I put my emotions aside, just like Dominic instructed. I sipped my tea. I removed them from the system. Her eyes widened with understanding. "The emotional architecture. You took it out of the formulations." I nodded. "But why not just tell them how to fix it?" I set my cup down. "Because some lessons can't be taught, Riley. They must be experienced." After Riley left, I turned off my phone and spent the afternoon in my mother's garden. The roses she'd planted years ago were blooming, their scent carrying memories of Sunday mornings when she'd taught me to identify every note in a perfume. I closed my eyes, the sun warm on my face, and uncorked Mom's vial again. As the complex aroma surrounded me, I felt her presence, not in some mystical way, but in the meticulous craft of the scent, in the balance of notes that only she could have achieved. And in that moment, breathing in her final creation, I knew exactly what I would demand when Dominic eventually came begging. Because he would come, that was certain now. The next morning, I woke to pounding on my apartment door. Through the peephole, I saw Kayla, our marketing director, shifting nervously from foot to foot. "You look terrible," I said, opening the door. She didn't bother with pleasantries. "Our largest distributor is threatening to cancel their entire order. The investor presentation has been postponed. 3 board members called for an emergency meeting yesterday." I leaned against the doorframe. "Sounds like a Tuesday at Sensorial." "This isn't funny, Iris." Her voice cracked. "Everything is falling apart. The development team is working around the clock trying to recreate your formulations." "And how's that going?" "They can't do it." She pushed a hand through her hair. "They understand the chemistry, but something's missing. The testers keep saying the same thing. The scents are fine but forgettable. They don't evoke anything. Because they aren't designed to anymore." Kayla's professional composure crumbled. "Please, just tell me what you changed." I removed what Dominic deemed unnecessary emotion. I crossed my arms. He wanted me to set my feelings aside, so I set them aside from the formulations too. "He shouldn't have said what he did after your mother died. Everyone knows that." Yet no one said anything. Her eyes dropped. "We were afraid. And now? Now we're desperate." I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Give Dominic a message. What I removed can't be replicated from notes or memory. It's a system, not a formula. After she left, I turned my phone back on. 27 missed calls, 16 voicemails, 43 emails. The digital desperation of a company in free fall. I spent the afternoon in my mother's studio, a small room in my apartment that still held her perfume organ, the workspace where she'd taught me to build sense note by note. Her notebooks filled the shelves, handwritten pages documenting decades of discovery. I opened one from 15 years ago, finding a passage about balance. "A truly transformative scent," she'd written, "requires mathematical precision but lives in emotional truth. Without the latter, you have merely arranged molecules in a pleasing order. With it, you have created memory, anticipation, and connection." Dominic never understood this. To him, our success came from clever marketing and premium packaging. He saw the emotional architecture system as a selling point, not the foundational element that distinguished us from competitors. When he interviewed me 5 years ago, he'd seemed so different, passionate about building something meaningful, eager to integrate my mother's theories into his developing brand. I was young, ambitious, and grieving my recent divorce. The opportunity to apply my chemistry background to my mother's emotional architecture theories felt like destiny. For the first 2 years, we were aligned. Dominic handled business. I created the products. Our first collection using my system, Truth Memory, sold out 3 production runs. When industry publications requested interviews, Dominic would say, "Iris is the real genius here," though he'd quickly pivot to discussing his business vision. Everything changed when big money entered the picture. An industry giant attempted to poach me with triple my salary. Instead of countering the offer, Dominic registered patents for our scent development methodology, listing himself as primary inventor and me as a contributing developer. When I confronted him, his response was baffling in its audacity. "I founded this company. Your contribution is valuable, but ultimately, Sensorial's success comes from my business strategy." I stayed despite this betrayal because I loved the work itself. Creating scents that moved people, that transported them, felt like my life's purpose, and I had nowhere else to go that would allow me the creative freedom I had, patents or not. So I buried my resentment alongside my creative recognition, channeling everything into perfecting the emotional architecture system. Each successful collection further entrenched the process that Dominic now legally owned but couldn't possibly replicate. My phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. An unknown number. "Hello? Iris." Thank God. It was Brendan, our finance director. "Listen, I'm calling from a personal phone so Dominic doesn't know. The investors are wavering. Word got out that you left, and they're questioning the company's ability to maintain quality." That sounds like a Dominic problem. It's an everyone problem. Without this capital injection, we can't expand production. Without expanded production, we can't fulfill the international orders we've already promised. Without those orders, the company collapses. I finished. "Exactly." He paused. "Look, I know what Dominic said to you was unforgivable, but 30 people might lose their jobs over this. People with families." The weight of his words settled on me. My revenge against Dominic might hurt innocent people, people like Riley, who had supported me through my mother's illness, covering my work without complaint. "I need to think," I said finally. "There's not much time. The rescheduled investor presentation is in 5 days. After hanging up, I paced my apartment, conflicted. My revenge was working perfectly. Dominic was panicking. The company was faltering, but the collateral damage troubled me. Mom would have said that true artistry should elevate others, not destroy them. I uncorked her vial again, letting the complex scent fill the room. As I breathed it in, I recognized something I'd missed before, a note of courage beneath the complexity. Mom's final message to me wasn't just about perfume. It was about standing in my power. My doorbell rang at 9:47 that evening. Through the peephole, I saw Dominic himself, his normally immaculate appearance disheveled, his confident posture replaced with something closer to defeat. I opened the door but blocked the entrance. 3 weeks, I said. That's how long it took for you to show up yourself. Can I come in? No, he sighed, looking suddenly older. I deserve that. You deserve worse. I know. He ran a hand through his hair. Everything we built is falling apart, Iris. We need you back. What exactly do you need? The head of product development who should set aside her emotions? Or the emotional architecture that makes our products unique? Understanding dawned slowly on his face. You removed it from the formulations. I put my emotions aside just as you instructed. He stepped back, the full implications hitting him. The architecture can't be recreated from the documentation? The documentation shows measurements and ingredients. The emotional architecture lives in application and intuition. In the space between notes, in the balance that creates connection. I leaned against the doorframe. In all the things you dismissed as irrelevant. I never said, when you told me to put my emotions aside, you weren't just being cruel about my mother's death. You were revealing how little you understand about what makes our products special. He was quiet for a long moment. What do you want? 3 conditions. First, a sensory therapy foundation in my mother's name. Second, a compassionate leave policy for all employees. Third, I return as Chief Creative Officer with complete autonomy over fragrance development. His jaw tightened. The board would never, then watch everything we built evaporate, I replied, beginning to close the door. Wait, he called. I'll make it happen. I want it in writing, and I want joint ownership of the patents. That's not one of your 3 conditions. I just added a 4th. He looked like he might argue, then deflated. I'll have legal draw up the papers tomorrow. You have until noon. After that, I permanently delete all my private notes on the emotional architecture system. After he left, I sat in the darkness of my apartment, uncertain if I'd won or lost. Revenge had been satisfying, but hollow. What I really wanted wasn't just to punish Dominic, it was to honor my mother's legacy and protect the work I believed in. I pulled out her vial again, breathing in the complex notes. In that moment, I made my decision. The next morning, I received the documents by courier. Joint patent ownership. The establishment of the Elena Laurent Sensory Therapy Foundation. A comprehensive, compassionate leave policy. And my promotion to Chief Creative Officer with creative autonomy guaranteed by contract. I signed where indicated and returned the papers with the courier. Then, I prepared to return to the company I'd nearly destroyed. Walking into the office the following day felt surreal. Conversations stopped mid-sentence as I passed. Some colleagues avoided eye contact, others offered cautious smiles. The energy was tense, like the air before a thunderstorm. Riley met me at my old office door, now bearing a new nameplate, Iris Laurent, Chief Creative Officer. Everyone's terrified, she whispered. Dominic called an all-hands meeting in 20 minutes. No one knows what's happening. I do, I said, setting down my bag. We're saving the company. Can you? There's only 4 days until the investor presentation. 4 days is plenty of time. I spent the first hour reviewing what had been done in my absence. The development team had attempted to recreate my formulations using the technical documentation, but without understanding the emotional architecture behind them, they'd created technically correct but soulless products. The meeting with Dominic was brief and uncomfortable. He introduced me as the new CCO, announced the compassionate leave policy, and mentioned the foundation in my mother's name. His words were correct, but his eyes revealed his humiliation. Iris will be leading the revised product development for the investor presentation, he concluded, not quite meeting my gaze. She has full authority on all creative decisions. After the meeting, I gathered the development team in the lab. For the first time, I explained what emotional architecture actually meant, not just as a marketing concept, but as a precise methodology. Scent is the only sense that bypasses rational thought and connects directly to the emotional brain, I explained, uncapping sample vials. When we construct a fragrance, we're not just arranging pleasant smells, we're creating a bridge between memory and anticipation. I demonstrated how specific combinations of notes could trigger emotional responses, how certain aldehydes created nostalgia, how particular wood notes grounded anxiety, how precise balances of florals opened the heart. This isn't mystical, I continued. It's neurochemical, but the application requires both precision and intuition. For the next 3 days, we worked nonstop rebuilding the collection. I restored the emotional architecture to each formulation, teaching the team as we worked. By the third evening, we had recreated 7 key scents for the presentation. On the 4th morning, I arrived early to find Dominic waiting in my office. For a moment, I thought he might have changed his mind about our agreement. "The samples you sent over last night," he said quietly. "They're extraordinary. They're what they always were," I corrected, before I removed the emotional architecture. He nodded, looking uncomfortable. "The marketing team needs the experience descriptions for the presentation materials. I'll have them by noon." He turned to leave, then paused. "Your mother would be proud of what you've built here." The comment caught me off guard, sincere in a way Dominic rarely was. "Thank you," I said, meaning it. The day of the investor presentation arrived with nervous energy rippling through the office. Everything depended on convincing these investors that our products were truly revolutionary, worthy of the capital injection that would take us international. As I prepared the scent samples in the conference room, arranging them precisely for maximum impact, I felt strangely calm. Whatever happened today, I had reclaimed my power and honored my mother's legacy. The conference room buzzed with anticipation as 7 potential investors, representatives from luxury conglomerates and private equity firms, took their seats around the table. Dominic stood at the head, delivering his practiced introduction about Sensorial's journey from boutique startup to emerging luxury brand. I watched from my position near the product display, noting how he carefully phrased his words, no longer claiming sole credit for our methodology, instead using "we," and occasionally glancing in my direction. The humbling had changed him, though whether temporarily or permanently remained to be seen. What separates Sensorial from competitors isn't just quality ingredients or attractive packaging, Dominic explained. It's our proprietary emotional architecture system developed by our Chief Creative Officer, Iris Laurent. He gestured toward me, yielding the floor. This was new. Before my departure, I'd always been introduced as a technical specialist who would demonstrate the products, never as the creator of our methodology. As I moved to the center of the room, I felt a strange calm. The vial my mother had given me was in my pocket, its weight reassuring against my thigh. "Fragrance is unique among luxury products," I began. "Unlike a handbag or jewelry, which you appreciate visually before purchasing, scent must be experienced to be understood. And unlike those items, fragrance works directly on the brain's emotional centers." I distributed the first sample cards, each treated with one of our signature scents. "What you're about to experience isn't just a pleasant aroma. It's an emotional journey crafted with mathematical precision." One by one, the investors closed their eyes as they breathed in the scents. I watched their faces transform, tension releasing from furrowed brows, lips softening into slight smiles, shoulders dropping as the carefully constructed notes triggered neurological responses. Our first collection focused on emotional balance. I continued, moving to the next sample. This upcoming collection explores emotional clarity, the moments when we see ourselves and our lives with perfect understanding. As the presentation progressed, I noticed something unexpected. Dominic, who normally maintained tight control over investor meetings, had stepped back against the wall. He was watching me with an expression I'd never seen before, something between admiration and revelation. The investors were responding exactly as planned. When I presented the market projections for the new collection, showing how our previous releases had outperformed competitors by substantial margins, their polite interest transformed into eager engagement. "These emotional responses you're describing," said Amara, representing the largest luxury conglomerate, "they're remarkably specific. How do you engineer that level of precision?" This was the moment I'd been waiting for, the question that would allow me to reveal the final piece of my plan. "That's an excellent question," I said. "And the answer involves something we haven't shared publicly until today." I reached into my pocket and removed my mother's vial, holding it up so light caught the amber liquid inside. "This contains my mother's final creation, the culmination of her life's work in sensory emotion. After her recent passing, I integrated her discoveries with our existing methodology to create what we're calling emotional precision mapping. Dominic straightened against the wall, his eyes widening slightly. This wasn't part of the planned presentation. Using this advanced approach, I continued, we can create scents that target not just general emotional states, but specific emotional experiences. Not just calming, but the calm clarity after making a difficult decision. Not just uplifting, but the rising joy of recognition for work well done. I uncapped the vial and placed a single drop on 7 new sample cards, passing them to the investors. This is just a prototype, but it demonstrates the potential of where we're heading. As they experienced the scent, the transformation was immediate and profound. Amara actually gasped. Another investor's eyes filled with tears. A third looked up with an expression of wonder I'd only seen in children. What? What was that? Asked Amara, her composed business demeanor momentarily stripped away. That was emotional precision, I answered. A scent designed to evoke the specific feeling of coming home to yourself after being lost. The room fell silent. Even Dominic appeared stunned. Miss Laurent, said one of the investors, clearing his throat, am I correct in understanding that you personally hold this methodology? The foundational emotional architecture system is jointly patented between myself and Sensorial, I clarified, watching Dominic from the corner of my eye. This advanced application, emotional precision mapping, is still in development, built on my mother's final work. And it would be exclusive to Sensorial? Asked another investor. Under the right conditions, yes. The energy in the room shifted. What had been a standard investment opportunity had transformed into something the luxury industry rarely encountered. Genuine innovation with profound market potential. I think we should discuss terms, said Amara, looking at her colleagues, who nodded in agreement. Dominic stepped forward, attempting to regain control of the meeting. We've prepared projection models for various investment levels. Actually, Amara interrupted, I'd like to hear from Miss Laurent about what conditions would ensure her commitment to developing this methodology exclusively for Sensorial. And there it was, the moment my revenge truly crystallized. Not in Dominic's panic when the products failed, not in the concessions I'd already secured, but in this moment, when the power dynamic permanently shifted. 3 essential conditions, I said, meeting Amara's gaze. First, continued development of the Elena Laurent Sensory Therapy Foundation, with 5% of all future profits directed there. Second, ethical business practices including the compassionate leave policy we've recently implemented. And third, creative autonomy protected by contract. Dominic remained silent, understanding exactly what was happening. The investment wasn't contingent on him anymore. It was contingent on me. Those terms seem reasonable, Amara replied, though I suspect there are details to be negotiated. Of course, I smiled. That's why we have Dominic. His business acumen is unmatched. The slight acknowledgement was both olive branch and reminder. I recognized his skills, while establishing that my creative vision was now the company's most valuable asset. The meeting concluded with handshakes and promises of detailed term sheets to follow. As the investors filed out, their excitement palpable, Dominic approached me. Emotional precision mapping? He asked quietly. When were you going to tell me about this? I just did. You blindsided me in front of potential investors. Yes, similar to how you blindsided me with patent registrations listing yourself as primary inventor of my methodology. His jaw tightened. That was business. So was this. We stood in silence, the conference room empty now, except for us. Will you really develop this new methodology for Sensorial? He finally asked. Yes, I answered honestly, but not for you, for the company. For the employees who deserve job security, for my mother's legacy. And what about us? He asked, surprising me with the personal question. There is no us, Dominic. There's a business relationship with clearly defined parameters. He nodded slowly. I deserve that. Yes, you do. As I gathered my materials, he remained standing there, seemingly at a loss, a man who had built his identity around being in control, now facing a future where that control was compromised. For what it's worth, he said as I reached the door, I am sorry about your mother, and how I responded. I paused, hand on the doorknob. Thank you for saying that. 3 months later, the investment deal closed. The capital injection was 30% higher than our original target, with specific provisions, ensuring my continued role and creative control. The Elena Laurent Sensory Therapy Foundation launched with its first research grants for studying how scent therapy could help trauma survivors. I moved into a new office, not Dominic's corner space, but a laboratory studio hybrid I designed myself. with north-facing windows and space for my mother's perfume organ, which I brought from home. The compassionate leave policy was tested when Riley's father had a stroke, and she took 3 weeks to help with his recovery. Upon her return, she was promoted to Assistant Creative Director, the first of several organizational changes that redistributed power throughout the company. Dominic remained CEO, but our working relationship transformed. The board, influenced by our new investors, created checks and balances that prevented either of us from making unilateral decisions. He handled business operations. I directed creative development. We communicated through structured meetings rather than casual interactions. Sometimes I caught him watching me during product presentations, that same expression of revelation on his face, as though continually realizing something that had been in front of him all along. One evening, working late in my studio office, I opened my mother's vial again. After months of careful analysis, I'd finally decoded every component of her final creation. It wasn't just a perfume. It was a methodology embedded in scent form, her lifetime of knowledge distilled into something that could be experienced rather than explained. I'd told the truth at the investor meeting. I was developing emotional precision mapping, using her work as foundation. What I hadn't mentioned was that each precision-mapped scent contained a trace element that couldn't be analyzed or replicated, a creative signature that ensured the company would always need me, just as I had needed my job when Dominic registered those patents. Was it petty? Perhaps. But it was also protection against future betrayal. As I closed the vial, my phone chimed with a message from Amara. The first international shipments had arrived in Asia, and customer response was overwhelming. Attached was a video of people experiencing our products for the first time, their expressions transforming as the emotional architecture did its work. I smiled, remembering my mother's words. A true perfume doesn't just smell good. It creates a bridge between memory and emotion. In the end, my revenge wasn't destroying Dominic or the company. It was transforming both, alchemizing pain into power, betrayal into boundary, loss into legacy. I had removed emotion from the system, then returned it on my own terms. The result wasn't just professional recognition or creative control, but something more profound, the understanding that emotions aren't weaknesses to set aside, but foundations to build upon. If you've ever been told to put your emotions aside in a professional setting, remember this: your emotional intelligence might be the very thing that makes your work irreplaceable. Share your experiences in the comments. I'd love to know how you've navigated these challenging workplace dynamics. And if this story resonated with you, subscribe for more explorations of how our emotional lives intersect with our professional ones. Because ultimately, it's not about revenge. It's about reclaiming your power and building something that truly matters.